The auction block stood in the center of Watsonville's dusty main square, and Eleanor Adelaide's knees trembled as rough hands pushed her forward into the blazing California sun of 1878. Her father's gambling debts about to be paid with her freedom. She kept her chin up despite the tears threatening to spill down her cheeks, refusing to let these men see her break. The auctioneer, a portly man with sweat stains darkening his vest, called out numbers while Eleanor's vision blurred with shame and fear. Her father had stumbled home 3 nights ago, reeking of whiskey and desperation, to tell her what he had done. He had lost everything to Marcus Thornton, a wealthy rancher who ruled the surrounding territory with an iron fist and a mean streak. When her father could not pay the $5,000 he owed, Thornton had suggested an alternative payment. The crowd of men gathered around the platform made her stomach turn. Some looked curious, others hungry in ways that made her skin crawl. She wore her only good dress, a faded blue cotton that had belonged to her mother before consumption took her 5 years prior. Eleanor was 20 years old, with hair the color of autumn wheat and eyes that shifted between green and gray depending on the light. She had worked as a seamstress since her mother's death, trying to keep food on the table while her father drank away their future. $500, someone called from the back. $600, another voice countered. Eleanor's hands clenched at her sides. This could not be happening. In America, in 1878, people were not supposed to be sold like cattle. But out here in California, far from the reaches of law and order, men like Thornton made their own rules. He had papers that her father had signed in his drunken stupor, papers that somehow made this transaction legal enough that the sheriff turned a blind eye. $1,000. The new voice cut through the murmuring crowd like a knife through butter. Deep and steady, it carried an authority that made heads turn. Eleanor's gaze snapped to the source. A tall man stepped forward from the shadows of the general store's awning. He wore dusty trail clothes, a worn leather vest over a dark shirt, and a black hat pulled low over his eyes. A gun belt sat comfortable on his hips, the holster tied down in the manner of someone who knew how to use it. As he moved closer, Eleanor could make out more details. He was young, perhaps 25, with a strong jaw darkened by several days of stubble and eyes the color of storm clouds. There was something in his expression she could not quite read, something that made him different from the leering men around her. $1,500, another bidder called, unwilling to be outdone. The stranger's jaw tightened. $2,000. Cash. A murmur rippled through the crowd. That was a fortune, more than most men in Watsonville saw in 2 years of hard work. The auctioneer's eyes gleamed with greed. $2,000 going once, going twice, $2,500. The shout came from a massive man pushing through the crowd. Eleanor recognized him immediately, and her blood ran cold. Jack Reeves, Thornton's right-hand man and the cruelest son of a gun in 3 counties. His face bore scars from countless brawls, and his reputation for violence preceded him wherever he went. Mr. Thornton wants to make sure the debt is paid proper-like. The stranger did not even glance at Reeves. His storm-gray eyes remained fixed on Eleanor, and for a moment, she thought she saw something like compassion flicker across his features. When he spoke again, his voice carried clearly across the square. $5,000. The silence that followed was absolute. Even the auctioneer seemed stunned. That was the exact amount of her father's debt, offered in one lump sum by a stranger whose name nobody seemed to know. Jack Reeves' face turned purple with rage. "Now you listen here. $5,000 in gold coin," the stranger continued, ignoring the interruption entirely. He reached into his saddlebag and pulled out a leather pouch that clinked heavily with the unmistakable sound of money. Right here, right now. Unless someone wants to go higher. No one spoke. Even Reeves knew when he was beaten. Thornton had given him a limit, and this stranger had just blown past it like it was nothing. The auctioneer practically trembled with excitement as he brought his gavel down. Sold. To the gentleman for $5,000. Eleanor's world tilted. She watched in a daze as the stranger counted out gold coins with steady hands, each one catching the sunlight as it clinked into the auctioneer's waiting palms. Papers were signed, hands were shaken, and just like that, her life belonged to someone new. The stranger climbed onto the platform and extended his hand toward her. Up close, she could see the weathering on his face from years under the sun, the laugh lines around his eyes, the surprising gentleness in his expression. "Madam," he said simply, "my name's Dalton York. Let us get you out of here." Eleanor stared at his outstretched hand for a long moment before placing her trembling fingers in his palm. His grip was warm and calloused, the hand of a working man, but his touch remained careful as he helped her down from the platform. The crowd began to disperse, disappointed that the spectacle had ended so quickly. Jack Reeves stood glowering near the saloon, his hand resting on his pistol, but he made no move to interfere. Even he was not foolish enough to start trouble over a legitimate sale. Dalton led Eleanor to a sturdy buckskin horse tied outside the general store. He moved with the easy confidence of someone who had spent most of his life in the saddle. Without a word, he untied a bedroll from behind his saddle and draped it over her shoulders like a shawl, shielding her from the stares of the remaining onlookers. "Can you ride?" he asked. Eleanor nodded, not trusting her voice. Her father had owned a mare once, before he sold it for drinking money. She knew how to sit a horse, though it had been years. Dalton swung into the saddle with fluid grace, then reached down to pull her up behind him. Eleanor hesitated only a moment before accepting his help, settling onto the horse's back with her arms wrapped awkwardly around his waist. She could feel the solid strength of him through his shirt, the steady rise and fall of his breathing. He smelled like leather and sage and something else, something clean that was just him. They rode out of Watsonville without looking back. The countryside rolled past in shades of gold and brown, the summer heat making the air shimmer above the dusty trail. Eleanor kept silent, her mind churning with questions she did not know how to ask. Who was this man? What did he want from her? She had been bought and paid for, legally owned like a piece of property. The thought made bile rise in her throat. Yet Dalton York had not touched her beyond helping her onto his horse, had not spoken to her with anything but respect. It made no sense. They rode for nearly an hour before Dalton guided the horse off the main trail and up a narrow path that wound into the hills. Live oaks provided scattered shade, and Eleanor could hear water running somewhere nearby. Finally, they emerged into a small clearing beside a creek. The grass grew green here, nourished by the constant water source, and birds sang in the branches overhead. It felt like a different world from the harsh dustiness of town. Dalton dismounted and helped Eleanor down, steadying her when her legs wobbled from the long ride. He led the horse to the creek to drink, then began unsaddling it with practiced efficiency. Eleanor stood uncertainly in the middle of the clearing, unsure what she was supposed to do or say. "You should sit," Dalton said without looking at her. "You look ready to fall over." Eleanor sank down onto a smooth boulder near the water's edge, her legs grateful for the rest. She watched as Dalton set up a simple camp, building a small fire ring and pulling supplies from his saddlebags. He moved with the ease of someone who had done this 1,000 times before, every motion purposeful and efficient. Finally, when the fire was crackling and a pot of coffee was heating over the flames, he settled onto a log across from her and met her eyes directly. "I imagine you have questions," he said. Eleanor laughed, a sharp sound edged with hysteria. "Questions? Mr. York, I have been sold like livestock to pay my father's debts, bought by a stranger for more money than I have ever seen in my life, and brought to the middle of nowhere. Yes, I have questions." A ghost of a smile crossed his face. "Fair enough. What do you want to know?" "Everything." Eleanor's voice shook despite her best efforts to control it. "Who are you? Why did you pay so much for me? What do you want?" Dalton poured coffee into 2 tin cups and handed her one. The warmth seeped into her cold hands, grounding her. He took a long sip from his own cup before answering. "My name is Dalton York. I am a cattleman, though I do other work when it pays better. I have a ranch about 20 miles north of here, up in the mountains where the grass stays green most of the year. As for why I bought you—" He paused, choosing his words carefully. "I was in town to sell some horses when I heard what was happening. Heard Marcus Thornton bragging in the saloon about how he was going to teach your father a lesson, make an example of what happens when people do not pay their debts. The way he talked about you." Dalton's jaw clenched. Let us just say it made my blood boil. Eleanor's hands tightened around her cup. "So you paid $5,000 out of the goodness of your heart?" "I paid $5,000 because no human being should be bought and sold, and because I have more money than I need." His gray eyes held her steadily. "My parents died of fever when I was 15. They left me that ranch and a small fortune in gold they had saved up. I built the ranch into something bigger, made some smart investments, and did well for myself. That money has been sitting in a bank in San Francisco doing nothing but collecting dust. Seemed like a better use to spend it making sure Marcus Thornton did not get his hands on you. And now what?" Eleanor's voice came out as barely more than a whisper. "You own me. Those papers you signed say I belong to you until the debt is paid." Dalton set his cup down and reached into his vest pocket. He pulled out the papers, the same ones the auctioneer had handed him after the sale. Eleanor watched in confusion as he held them over the fire. The edges caught and curled, flames consuming the legal words that bound her to him. Within seconds, nothing remained but ash. "There," Dalton said quietly. "The debt is paid. You do not owe me anything. You do not owe anyone anything. You owe only yourself now." Eleanor stared at the ashes drifting on the warm air currents from the fire. Her mind struggled to process what had just happened. "I do not understand," she whispered. "You just burned $5,000. I burned a piece of paper that said one person owned another person. The money was already spent the moment I handed it over. At least this way it did some good." He stood and walked to his horse, pulling a small leather bag from the saddlebags. He returned and set it on the rock beside her. "There is $200 in there. Enough for you to get to San Francisco or Sacramento, maybe Denver if you want to go east. Enough to rent a room and set yourself up with a new start. You can sew, you said. A good seamstress can make decent money in a city." Eleanor's vision blurred with tears. She had been so certain, so absolutely sure that her life was over, that she would be used and abused and broken by whichever man had enough money to buy her. The kindness Dalton offered felt foreign, almost painful in its unexpectedness. "Why?" The word came out choked. "Why would you do this for me? You do not even know me." Dalton settled back onto his log, his expression distant. "My mother's sister was in a situation somewhat similar to yours, back before I was born. A man she thought loved her ran up debts and then sold her to cover them. She was not as lucky as you. No one came to help her. She died in a brothel in Sacramento when she was 23 years old." His voice remained steady, but Eleanor could hear the old pain beneath the words. My mother never got over losing her sister that way. Made me promise before the fever took her that I would never stand by and let something like that happen if I had the power to stop it. Eleanor wiped at her eyes with the back of her hand. I am sorry about your aunt and your parents. It was a long time ago. Dalton poked at the fire with a stick. Point is, you are free now. You can go anywhere you want, do anything you want. I will take you back to town tomorrow if that is what you want, or I can guide you to the stage stop in San Jose. Your choice. The sun was sinking toward the horizon, painting the sky in shades of orange and pink. Eleanor sipped her coffee and watched the play of light through the oak leaves. Free. The word felt strange in her mind, too big and too fragile all at once. She was free, but free to do what? Go to a city where she knew no one, with nothing but $200 and the skills her mother had taught her. Start over in a world that had proven itself cruel and arbitrary. What if I do not want to go to a city? The question surprised her as much as it seemed to surprise Dalton. He looked up, his gray eyes questioning. Eleanor hurried on before she lost her nerve. You said you have a ranch. Do you have anyone to cook and clean, to mend your clothes and keep your house? Understanding dawned on Dalton's face. You want to work for me. I want to earn my own way, Eleanor corrected. You said I do not owe you anything, but I would feel better paying you back, at least in part. If I worked for you for a while, did the housekeeping and such, would that be acceptable? I am a hard worker, Mr. York. I promise you would not regret it. Dalton considered this for a long moment. I will be honest with you, Miss Adelaide. I live alone up there, have for years. It would not look proper, a single woman living on my ranch without a chaperone. People would talk. People just watched me get sold in the town square, Eleanor said bitterly. I think my reputation is past worrying about, he winced. That is fair. All right, if that is what you want, I could use the help. The house is a mess, I will admit that. I can cook enough to keep from starving, but that is about the extent of my domestic skills. I can pay you $30 a month plus room and board. You can stay as long as you want, leave whenever you want. Does that sound fair? $30 a month was more than Eleanor had made as a seamstress, even during her best months. It was generous, probably too generous, but she found herself nodding. The idea of going to a strange city alone terrified her more than she wanted to admit. At least working for Dalton York gave her a plan, a purpose, something to focus on while she figured out what came next. It sounds more than fair, she said. Thank you, Mr. York. Dalton, he corrected with a slight smile. If you are going to be working for me, we should probably use first names, and I will call you Eleanor if that is all right. Eleanor is fine, she agreed, returning his smile tentatively. They ate a simple supper of beans and bacon as the stars emerged overhead. Dalton proved to be easy company, talking about his ranch and the cattle he raised, asking Eleanor about her sewing work and what life in Watsonville had been like before today's disaster. He had a dry sense of humor that surprised her, coaxing actual laughs from her despite everything that had happened. By the time he spread his bedroll for her near the fire and took his own blanket to the other side of the clearing, Eleanor felt more settled than she had in days. She lay awake for a long time, listening to the creek and the night birds, trying to process the strange turn her life had taken. This morning she had woken up in her father's house, dreading the auction. Tonight she was free, employed and camping under the stars with a man who had spent a fortune to save her from a terrible fate. It felt like something from one of the dime novels she used to sneak from the general store, too dramatic and convenient to be real. Yet here she was, and here was Dalton York, already snoring softly across the clearing. She owed only herself now. The words circled through her mind like a prayer. She had spent her whole life owing something to someone, taking care of her father, trying to compensate for her mother's death, working herself to exhaustion to keep them fed. For the first time in her 20 years, she had the chance to figure out what Eleanor Adelaide actually wanted from life. The possibility was terrifying and exhilarating in equal measure. They set out at dawn, riding north into the coastal mountains. The landscape changed gradually as they climbed, the dry grasslands giving way to forests of oak and pine. The air grew cooler and sweeter, scented with resin and earth. They stopped at midday to rest the horse and eat cold biscuits from Dalton's saddlebags, then pressed on through the afternoon. As the sun began its descent, they crested a ridge and Eleanor caught her first glimpse of Dalton's ranch. It spread across a high valley, a green jewel cradled by protective mountains. A creek ran through the middle, the same one they had camped beside the night before, and cattle dotted the meadows like brown and white stones. The house sat on a slight rise, a solid structure of wood and stone with a wide porch and a stone chimney. Outbuildings clustered nearby. A barn, a bunkhouse, a smokehouse, corrals for horses. "It is beautiful," Eleanor breathed. Dalton's face brightened with unmistakable pride. "My father chose this spot. The mountains protect it from the worst of the winter storms, and the creek never runs dry, even in the hardest summers. We run about 300 head of cattle, and I breed horses on the side. Best quarter horses in California, if I do say so myself." They rode down into the valley as the shadows lengthened. Dalton had not exaggerated about the state of his house. The main room was cluttered with gear and papers, dirty dishes piled in the dry sink, dust coating every surface. The bedroom was barely better, and the kitchen looked like it had not seen a proper cleaning in months. Eleanor tried not to let her dismay show on her face. "I know it is bad," Dalton said apologetically. "I spend most of my time outside. The house has just sort of gotten away from me." "It is nothing that soap and elbow grease cannot fix," Eleanor assured him, though privately she wondered where to even start. "I will need supplies. Soap, scrub, brushes, fresh linens if you have them." Dalton showed her the storeroom, surprisingly well stocked with household goods. His mother must have been an organized woman, and he had kept up the supplies even if he did not use them. Eleanor selected what she needed and set to work immediately, needing something to do with her nervous energy. Dalton tried to help, but she shooed him out, telling him to see to his livestock and leave the house to her. She worked until well past dark, scrubbing and organizing and making the place habitable. Dalton came in around 9 with fresh eggs from the chicken coop she had not even noticed, and she cooked them up with some potatoes and onions she found in the root cellar. They ate at the now clean table, and Eleanor felt a small glow of satisfaction at the transformation she had already begun. "This is the best meal I have had in months," Dalton said around a mouthful of eggs. "You are a miracle worker." Eleanor ducked her head to hide her pleased smile. "It is just eggs and potatoes. It is food that does not taste like charcoal and is served on a clean plate. Trust me, that is a miracle around here." Over the next few weeks, Eleanor transformed the ranch house. She scrubbed every surface until it gleamed, mended the curtains, and made new ones from fabric she found in the storeroom, organized Dalton's chaotic papers into a system that actually made sense. She tended the vegetable garden behind the house, coaxed the chickens into better production, and cooked 3 solid meals a day. The work was hard and constant, but she found she did not mind. It felt good to build something, to see the results of her efforts. Dalton proved to be an easy person to work for. He was up before dawn every day, out checking on the cattle or working with his horses, always busy with the endless tasks a ranch demanded. but he never barked orders at her, never treated her like a servant. He asked if she needed anything, thanked her for every meal, and pitched in with the household chores when he could. In the evenings, they fell into a comfortable routine of sitting on the porch after supper, watching the stars emerge and talking about nothing in particular. Eleanor found herself looking forward to those evening conversations. Dalton had traveled more than she expected, working cattle drives up to Montana in his younger years, visiting San Francisco and even Denver on business. He told stories about stampedes and blizzards, about colorful characters he had met and the wild beauty of the territories. In turn, Eleanor shared memories of her mother, carefully editing out the worst of her father's failings. She talked about the satisfaction of creating a perfect seam, the way fabric could be transformed with the right touch. "You should set up a sewing room," Dalton said one evening. "There is a small room off the back of the house that is just full of junk. We could clear it out, set you up with a good table and a window for light. You could take in work from the surrounding ranches, make some extra money if you wanted." Eleanor had not thought about sewing much since the auction, too busy with housework, but the idea appealed to her. "Would that be all right? I would not want to neglect my duties here." "Eleanor, you work harder than any 3 people I know. If you want to do some sewing in your spare time, you have more than earned it. Besides, folks around here would appreciate having a good seamstress nearby. The nearest one is in San Jose, 2 days' ride away." They cleared out the room the next day, and Eleanor was delighted to discover that the junk included an old treadle sewing machine that had belonged to Dalton's mother. It needed some oil and adjustment, but once Dalton got it working again, it ran like a dream. Eleanor spent her evenings in her new sewing room, the rhythmic clack of the machine soothing after long days of work. Word spread quickly that there was a seamstress at the York ranch, and soon she had a steady stream of customers. Ranchers' wives needing dresses, cowboys wanting shirts mended, even a few special orders for wedding clothes. Summer turned to autumn. The heat eased, and the leaves on the oaks turned gold and russet. Eleanor had been at the ranch for 3 months, and it felt more like home than any place she had ever lived. She and Dalton had fallen into an easy partnership, working together to keep the ranch running smoothly. He taught her to ride properly, setting her up on a gentle mare named Daisy, and she discovered a love of horseback riding she had not expected. They would ride out together sometimes in the evenings, Dalton showing her the boundaries of his land, pointing out landmarks and telling her the stories behind them. It was on one of these evening rides that Eleanor first noticed the change in her feelings. They had ridden to the top of the ridge overlooking the valley, watching the sun set in a blaze of orange and purple. Dalton was talking about his plans to expand the herd next spring, his face animated with enthusiasm, and Eleanor found herself watching him instead of the sunset. The strong line of his jaw, the way his eyes crinkled when he smiled, the gentle strength in his hands as he held the reins. He was handsome, she realized with a start. More than that, he was kind and hardworking and funny, and everything she had never known she wanted. The realization terrified her. This was her employer, the man who had saved her from a terrible fate and given her a chance at a new life. She could not risk complicating things with feelings. Besides, a man like Dalton York could have his pick of women. He had no reason to be interested in someone like her, damaged goods sold at auction to pay her father's debts. But try as she might, Eleanor could not stop the feelings from growing. She caught herself watching for him throughout the day, listening for his footsteps on the porch. Her heart raced when their hands accidentally touched passing plates at supper. She lay awake at night, her room separated from his by a single wall, tormented by thoughts she had no business thinking. October arrived with crisp mornings and the promise of winter ahead. Eleanor was in the kitchen making preserves when a rider appeared on the trail leading to the ranch. She stepped out onto the porch, wiping her hands on her apron, and her blood ran cold. She recognized that horse, recognized the brutal set of the rider's shoulders. Jack Reeves. Dalton emerged from the barn, alerted by the sound of hoofbeats. His hand dropped casually to his gun belt, a gesture so natural Eleanor knew he had done it 1,000 times before. She hurried down from the porch to stand beside him, her presence a silent show of solidarity. Reeves reined in his horse a respectful distance away. Up close, he looked even meaner than Eleanor remembered, his scarred face twisted in a permanent scowl. But there was calculation in his eyes, a careful assessment of the situation. "York," he said by way of greeting. "Reeves," Dalton replied evenly. "You are a long way from Thornton Spread. What brings you up here? Mr. Thornton sent me with a message." Reeves shifted in his saddle, his gaze flicking to Eleanor before returning to Dalton. "He wants to buy the girl back. He is willing to pay $10,000 for her." Eleanor's stomach dropped. $10,000, twice what Dalton had paid. It was a fortune enough to tempt any man. "She is not for sale," Dalton said flatly. "Now, do not be hasty," Reeves cajoled. "That is a lot of money. You could buy a lot of cattle with $10,000. Hell, you could buy a whole new ranch. And she is just a girl. Plenty more where she came from." "No." Dalton's voice had gone hard as granite. "Eleanor is a free woman. She works for me by her choice and she can leave anytime she wants. I do not own her, and I would not sell her even if I did. You can tell Thornton that." Reeves' expression darkened. "Mr. Thornton is not a man who takes no for an answer. He does not like being made to look foolish. That auction was supposed to teach people a lesson, and you mucked it all up. He is offering you a good deal here. I would advise you to take it. And I am advising you to get off my land before I help you leave." Dalton's hand had not moved from his gun, but the threat was unmistakable. "Eleanor stays here as long as she wants to stay, and there is nothing Thornton or you or anyone else can do about it." For a long moment, the two men stared at each other. Eleanor held her breath, sure violence was about to erupt. But finally, Reeves spat into the dust and hauled his horse around. "You are making a mistake, York, a big one. Mr. Thornton has a long memory." He spurred his horse and galloped back the way he had come, leaving a cloud of dust in his wake. Dalton watched until he crested the ridge and disappeared, then finally relaxed his stance. "Are you all right?" he asked Eleanor. She nodded, though she was shaking. "I am sorry. I brought trouble to your doorstep." "You did not bring anything. Thornton is a bully who does not like being thwarted. That is his problem, not yours." Dalton placed a gentle hand on her shoulder. "I meant what I said. You are safe here, Eleanor. I will not let anyone take you." The warmth of his touch seeped through her dress, grounding her. Eleanor looked up at him and saw something in his eyes that made her breath catch, something warm and protective and tender. Something that looked almost like the feelings she had been trying so hard to suppress. "Thank you," she whispered. They stood that way for a moment longer, then Dalton cleared his throat and stepped back. "I should ride the property lines, make sure Reeves actually left." "Can you handle things here?" "Of course." Eleanor forced herself to sound normal. "Supper will be ready when you get back." She watched him saddle his horse and ride out, her heart a confused tangle of fear and hope. Thornton's offer changed things. It meant she was still in danger, still a target. But it also meant Dalton had chosen her safety over a fortune. That had to mean something, did it not? The weeks following Reeves' visit were tense. Dalton hired 2 men to help around the ranch, ostensibly for the extra work, but really for the added security. Tom and Charlie were weathered cowboys who had worked for Dalton before, loyal and competent. Their presence made Eleanor feel safer, though she noticed all three men were more watchful now, more aware of riders approaching. November brought the first real storms of winter. Rain lashed the valley for days at a time, turning the roads to mud and keeping everyone close to home. Eleanor spent the gray days baking and sewing, while Dalton and his men tended to the livestock and made repairs on the buildings. The evenings were cozy. The four of them gathered around the fire while the wind howled outside. Tom played the harmonica, and Charlie told outrageous stories about his cowboying days that had them all laughing. It was during one of these evenings that Dalton asked Eleanor about her father. They were alone for once, Tom and Charlie having already retired to the bunkhouse. Rain drummed on the roof and the fire crackled warm in the hearth. "Do you ever think about him?" Dalton asked quietly. "Your father," Eleanor stared into the flames. She had tried not to think about her father, the man who had sold her to pay his debts. "Sometimes. More than I want to, less than I probably should. He was not always bad, you know. When my mother was alive, he was different, sober most of the time, working steady. But after she died, it was like something broke inside him. He just gave up." "That does not excuse what he did to you." "No," Eleanor agreed. "It does not, but I understand it in a way. Grief makes people do terrible things sometimes. He loved my mother so much that losing her destroyed him." Dalton was quiet for a moment. "You are more forgiving than I would be." "I am not sure it is forgiveness exactly. More like acceptance, maybe. He is my father. I cannot change that. I cannot change what he did. All I can do is move forward with my own life." She glanced at Dalton. "A life you gave back to me. I have not properly thanked you for that." "You do not need to thank me. Seeing you here, happy and safe, that is thanks enough." The way he looked at her made Eleanor's pulse quicken. She wanted to say something, to express the depth of what she felt, but fear held her tongue. What if she was reading this wrong? What if his kindness was just kindness, nothing more? Before she could gather her courage, Dalton stood abruptly. "I should check on the horses one more time before bed. Make sure the barn roof is holding." He grabbed his coat and hat and disappeared into the rain, leaving Eleanor alone by the fire. She pressed her hands to her flushed cheeks, frustrated with herself. When had she become such a coward? She had survived being sold at auction, had rebuilt her entire life from nothing. Surely she could find the courage to tell one man how she felt. December arrived with clear, cold skies. The storms had passed, leaving the world washed clean and sparkling. Dalton made a trip to San Jose for supplies, returning with fabric and lace that Eleanor had requested for a special commission. One of the neighboring ranchers' daughters was getting married in the spring, and Eleanor had been hired to make the wedding dress. It was her biggest job yet, and she was determined to make it perfect. Christmas approached. Eleanor had never particularly enjoyed the holiday, too many painful memories of her mother's absence and her father's drinking. But this year felt different. She decorated the house with pine boughs and holly, baked special treats, even convinced Dalton to go out and cut a small tree for the main room. Tom and Charlie joined them for Christmas Eve dinner, a feast of roast beef and all the trimmings that left everyone groaning and happy. After the hired men returned to the bunkhouse, Eleanor presented Dalton with the gift she had been working on in secret. A new shirt made from soft blue cotton that exactly matched his eyes. She had embroidered his initials on the cuff in threads so dark it was almost invisible, a private touch just for him. Dalton's face lit up when he unfolded the shirt. "Eleanor, this is beautiful. You should not have gone to so much trouble." "It was no trouble," she assured him. "You have done so much for me. It is the least I could do." He disappeared into his room and emerged a moment later wearing the shirt, It fit him perfectly. Eleanor had made sure of that, and the color made his gray eyes almost luminous. He looked so handsome that Eleanor's breath caught. "I have something for you too," Dalton said, suddenly shy. He pulled a small wrapped package from behind the tree and handed it to her. Eleanor opened it with trembling fingers. Inside was a silver locket on a delicate chain, the kind of jewelry she had never dreamed of owning. She opened the locket and found 2 tiny spaces for photographs, currently empty. "I thought you might like to put a picture of your mother in one side," Dalton said softly, "and save the other for whatever you want. A reminder that you have a future to fill, not just a past to remember." Tears pricked Eleanor's eyes. It was the most thoughtful gift anyone had ever given her. "It is perfect, thank you." She hesitated, then held it out to him. "Will you help me put it on?" Dalton moved behind her, his fingers warm against her neck as he fastened the clasp. Eleanor shivered at his touch, hyper-aware of his proximity. When he finished, his hands lingered on her shoulders for just a moment. She turned to face him, and suddenly they were standing impossibly close, his eyes dark and intense in the firelight. "Eleanor," he said, his voice rough. "I need to tell you something," her heart hammered. "What is it?" "When I bought you at that auction, I thought I was just doing the right thing, saving someone who needed saving. But these past few months, getting to know you, seeing your strength and your kindness and your spirit." He paused, seeming to search for words. "You are the most remarkable woman I have ever met, and I have fallen completely in love with you." Eleanor's world tilted. "You have. I know I have no right. You have been through so much, and I am your employer, and you probably do not see me that way at all. But I had to tell you. I could not keep pretending I do not feel." Eleanor reached up and pulled his face down to hers, cutting off his words with a kiss. For a moment, Dalton froze in surprise. Then his arms came around her, crushing her against him as he kissed her back with a hunger that matched her own. It felt like coming home, like finding something she had been searching for her entire life without knowing it. When they finally broke apart, both breathing hard, Eleanor rested her forehead against his. "I love you too. I have for weeks, but I was afraid to say anything. I thought you were just being kind, that you could never see me as anything but the girl you bought at auction." "I have never thought of you that way," Dalton said fiercely. "You are Eleanor Adelaide, the woman who transformed my house and my life. The woman who faces every challenge with courage and grace. The woman I want to spend the rest of my life with, if you will have me." Eleanor pulled back to look at him, making sure she understood correctly. "Are you asking marry me?" Dalton said, cupping her face in his hands. "I know it is fast, and if you need time, I understand. But I have never been more certain of anything in my life. I love you, Eleanor. Marry me." Joy flooded through her, so intense it was almost painful. "Yes. Yes, of course, yes." They kissed again, and this time it was sweeter, slower, full of promise. They stayed up late into the night, talking about their future, making plans. Dalton wanted a spring wedding, something small with just a few friends. Eleanor wanted to make her own dress. They talked about expanding the house, about the children they hoped to have, about growing old together on this ranch they both loved. It was nearly dawn when they finally parted to their separate rooms, and Eleanor lay in bed with her fingers touching the locket at her throat, unable to stop smiling. She had been sold to pay her father's debts, bought by a stranger at auction. She had thought her life was over. But instead, it had led her here, to Dalton York, to love and freedom and a future brighter than any she could have imagined. Winter deepened. Dalton rode to San Jose again, this time returning with a ring. A simple gold band with a small diamond that had belonged to his mother. Eleanor cried when he slipped it onto her finger, overwhelmed by the symbol of his commitment. They told Tom and Charlie, who whooped and hollered and demanded a celebration. Word spread through the scattered ranching community, and neighbors Eleanor had met only in passing stopped by to offer congratulations. Not everyone was pleased with the news. In mid-January, Dalton returned from a trip to town with a grim expression. He found Eleanor in her sewing room working on the wedding dress commission. "Marcus Thornton was in town," he said without preamble. "He heard about our engagement." Eleanor set down her needle, her stomach knotting. "What did he say?" "He made some threats, nothing specific. But he made it clear he still considers you his property, that I stole what was rightfully his. He is claiming your father's debt was to him personally, not just for money he lost gambling. Says he had other plans for you." Dalton's jaw tightened. "The sheriff was there. I told him everything, showed him the papers from the auction. Sheriff Daniels said the sale was legal and that you belong to no one but yourself now. But Thornton does not care about legal. He cares about pride and power." Eleanor stood and took Dalton's hands. "What do we do?" "We move up the wedding. I want you legally my wife as soon as possible. It will provide some additional protection, and I want you armed." He pulled a small pistol from his coat pocket. "This was my mother's. I am going to teach you to shoot it." Over the next week, Dalton taught Eleanor how to handle the gun. She proved a quick study, her seamstress's precision translating well to firearms. She did not enjoy it, hated the loud bang and the kick of the weapon, but she understood the necessity. Thornton was not a man to give up easily, and she would not be a helpless victim again. They set the wedding for the 1st of February, a cold, clear Sunday. The local circuit preacher agreed to perform the ceremony. Tom and Charlie helped Eleanor clean and decorate the house. She finished her wedding dress the night before, a simple gown of ivory wool that would keep her warm in the winter cold but was still lovely, with lace at the collar and cuffs. The morning of the wedding, Eleanor woke before dawn, too excited to sleep. She bathed in the warm water Dalton hauled for her, styled her hair with trembling hands, and put on her dress. When she looked at herself in the small mirror, she barely recognized the woman staring back. She looked happy, radiant even, a far cry from the terrified girl on the auction block 6 months ago. The ceremony was held in the main room of the ranch house. Besides Tom and Charlie, a few neighbors had ridden over to witness the union. The preacher was a kindly old man who kept the service short and sweet. When he prompted Dalton to kiss his bride, Dalton swept Eleanor into his arms and kissed her thoroughly, to the cheers and whistles of their guests. They celebrated with a simple meal, then the neighbors departed before dark, not wanting to navigate the trails at night. Tom and Charlie retreated to the bunkhouse, giving the newlyweds privacy. Finally alone, Dalton took Eleanor's hand and led her to his room, their room now. They made love for the first time that night, gentle and slow, learning each other with patient care. Dalton was tender with her, constantly checking that she was comfortable, that this was what she wanted. Eleanor had been nervous, knowing only vague warnings from older women about a wife's duties. But with Dalton, it was not a duty. It was a joy, a connection deeper than any words could express. Afterward, they lay tangled together in the darkness, Eleanor's head on Dalton's chest, listening to the steady beat of his heart. "I love you, Mrs. York," Dalton murmured into her hair. Eleanor smiled against his skin. "I love you too, Mr. York." February passed in a haze of happiness. Eleanor moved her things into Dalton's room and they settled into married life with surprising ease. She continued her housework and sewing, while Dalton managed the ranch. But now their evenings were spent together in their bed, talking and laughing and making love, building the intimacy that would carry them through a lifetime. March brought warming weather and the first signs of spring. The grass began to green up, and the cattle grew frisky after the long winter. Dalton and his men started the spring work, mending fences and preparing for calving season. Eleanor planted a larger vegetable garden, dreaming of feeding the family she hoped they would have. It was mid-March when trouble found them. Eleanor was alone in the house, Dalton and the hands out checking on the pregnant cows in the far pasture. She was kneading bread dough when she heard horses approaching, several of them. Through the window, she saw 5 men riding into the yard, and her heart sank when she recognized Jack Reeves in the lead. Marcus Thornton himself rode beside him, a heavy-set man with cold eyes and a cruel mouth. Eleanor wiped the flour from her hands and grabbed the pistol Dalton insisted she keep close. She tucked it into the pocket of her apron and stepped out onto the porch, trying to look braver than she felt. "Mr. Thornton," she said evenly, "you are trespassing." Thornton dismounted, his men following suit. "Mrs. York, I believe, or should I still call you Miss Adelaide? That sham marriage does not make much difference in my eyes. My marriage is legal and binding. I am Dalton York's wife. You have no claim on me." "That is where you are wrong, girl." Thornton climbed the porch steps, and Eleanor had to force herself not to retreat. "Your father owed me money, and when he could not pay, we made a deal. You were to come work for me, pay off the debt with your labor. York interfered with that agreement. My father had no right to sell me." "Your father had every right, and I have come to collect what is mine." Thornton gestured to his men. "Take her." Eleanor pulled the pistol from her pocket and leveled it at Thornton's chest. Her hands shook, but her voice remained steady. "Do not come any closer." Thornton laughed, a cruel sound. "You are not going to shoot me, girl. You do not have it in you." "Try me," Eleanor said coldly. "I survived being sold at auction. I survived starting over with nothing. I will shoot you before I let you take me." For the first time, doubt flickered across Thornton's face. Before he could respond, the thunder of hoofbeats announced Dalton's return. He burst into the yard at a full gallop, Tom and Charlie right behind him. All 3 men had their guns drawn. Dalton swung down from his horse, his face a mask of fury. "Get away from my wife." "Your wife is stolen property, York. I am just taking back what belongs to me." "Eleanor belongs to no one but herself, and she chose to marry me." "The law is on our side, Thornton. You have no case here." "The law is whatever I say it is in this county," Thornton snarled. But his eyes darted nervously to the 3 armed men facing him. His hired guns might be willing to draw against 1 man, but 3 was a different story. "The law is what Sheriff Daniels says it is," a new voice called out. Everyone turned to see the sheriff himself riding into the yard, flanked by 2 deputies. "And Sheriff Daniels says this woman is free and legally married." Eleanor sagged with relief. Dalton must have sent word to town, must have asked the sheriff to keep an eye out. Thornton's face went purple with rage. "This is not over," he spat. "You cannot hide behind the law forever, York. Accidents happen on ranches, houses catch fire, people disappear." "Are you threatening me and my wife in front of the sheriff?" Dalton asked mildly. "That does not seem smart, Thornton." Sheriff Daniels urged his horse forward. "I think you should leave now, Mr. Thornton, and I would advise you to leave these good people alone. Any more trouble from you and I will have grounds to arrest you. Understood?" Thornton glared at Eleanor one more time, his eyes full of cold promise. Then he jerked his horse around and rode out, his men following. They watched until the group disappeared over the ridge. "Thank you, Sheriff," Dalton said. "Your timing was perfect." "I've been keeping an eye on Thornton since you told me about his threats. Figured he might try something eventually." The sheriff tipped his hat to Eleanor. "Madam, are you all right?" Eleanor realized she was still holding the pistol. She lowered it carefully. "I am fine, thank you." Just a bit shaken. After the sheriff and his deputies left, Dalton pulled Eleanor into his arms, holding her tight. She could feel him trembling. "I thought I was going to lose you," he said roughly. "When I saw Thornton on our porch, saw you holding that gun." "I am fine," Eleanor murmured. "I am right here. We are both fine." But she knew this was not over. Men like Thornton did not give up just because the law told them to. They would have to be vigilant, careful. She refused to live in fear, but she would be smart. She would be prepared. The next few weeks were tense. Dalton hired another hand, a tough older cowboy named Jim who had experience with trouble. They took turns keeping watch at night. Eleanor never went anywhere without her pistol. But as March turned to April and nothing happened, they began to relax slightly. Perhaps Thornton had decided they were not worth the trouble after all. April brought the rush of calving season. Dalton and his men worked around the clock, helping cows in distress, protecting newborns from predators. Eleanor supported them with endless pots of coffee and hearty meals served at all hours. She fell into bed exhausted every night, but it was a good exhaustion, the satisfaction of hard work well done. It was during calving season that Eleanor realized her monthly courses were late. At first, she thought it was just the stress and hard work throwing her off schedule. But when another week passed with no sign, she began to hope. She was afraid to say anything to Dalton, afraid to jinx it. She waited until she was 2 months late before finally admitting the truth. She told him one evening in early May after supper. They were sitting on the porch, watching the last light fade from the sky. Eleanor took a deep breath and reached for his hand. "Dalton, I think I am going to have a baby." He went completely still. "You think?" "I am 2 months late with my courses, and I have been sick in the mornings. I have been trying to hide it, but—" She bit her lip. "I am fairly certain." Dalton let out a whoop of joy that probably carried across the valley. He swept her up and spun her around, then immediately set her down again, worried. "I am sorry, should I not have done that? I do not want to hurt the baby." Eleanor laughed, giddy with relief at his reaction. "I am pregnant, not made of glass. I can handle a spin." They stayed up late that night, talking about names and nurseries, about teaching their child to ride and work the ranch. Dalton was adamant that Eleanor should take it easy, but she refused to be treated like an invalid. She continued her work, just being a bit more careful, a bit more mindful of her limits. News of the pregnancy spread through the community, and Eleanor was touched by the outpouring of support. Women she barely knew stopped by with advice and hand-me-down baby clothes. The neighbor whose daughter's wedding dress Eleanor had made sent over a beautiful handmade cradle. Even gruff, old Tom turned bashful when she announced the news, muttering something about the bunkhouse needing a coat of paint before the baby arrived. Summer arrived in full force. Eleanor's belly grew round, and Dalton became even more protective, constantly fussing over her. She found it endearing and exasperating in equal measure. Despite her pregnancy, she insisted on continuing her sewing work, finishing up existing commissions though she stopped taking new ones. She wanted time to prepare for the baby, to sew tiny clothes and blankets and all the things a new life would need. In August, Eleanor was working in her sewing room when she heard horses again. She rose awkwardly, one hand supporting her heavy belly, and peered out the window. Her heart sank. Marcus Thornton, Jack Reeves, and 3 other men were riding toward the house. But this time they were not stopping in the yard. Black smoke was already rising from the direction of the barn. "Fire!" Eleanor screamed, stumbling out onto the porch. "Dalton, the barn is on fire!" Dalton and his men came running from various parts of the ranch. They saw the smoke and immediately started organizing, hauling buckets from the well, trying to save what they could. The horses were screaming inside the burning barn, and Dalton ran toward the flames to free them. Eleanor watched in horror as Thornton and his men simply sat on their horses, watching the chaos with satisfaction. Her hand dropped to the pocket where she kept her pistol, but she knew she was no match for 5 armed men. Then she remembered the shotgun Dalton kept by the front door. She hurried inside and grabbed it, checking that it was loaded. She stepped back onto the porch and leveled the shotgun at Thornton. "Get off our land," Thornton actually laughed. "You going to stop us with that, little mama? You might hit one of us, but then what?" "My boys will cut you down where you stand." "Maybe," Eleanor said, "but I will make sure the one I hit is you." For a long moment they stared at each other. Then Reeves said, "Boss, the sheriff could show up again. We made our point, let us go." Thornton looked like he wanted to argue, but finally nodded. "You got lucky today, Mrs. York, but your luck is going to run out eventually. You are living on borrowed time." They rode off, and Eleanor finally lowered the shotgun, her arms shaking with the weight of it. She hurried toward the barn, where Dalton and his men had managed to get all the horses out and were fighting to contain the blaze. It took hours, the whole community pitching in when smoke drew them from neighboring ranches. By the time the fire was finally out, the barn was a total loss. They stood surveying the damage in the twilight. The barn was gone, along with most of the tack and supplies stored inside. It was a devastating financial blow, even for someone as well off as Dalton. But no one had been hurt, no animals lost. Eleanor clung to Dalton, both of them sooty and exhausted. "We will rebuild," Dalton said, his voice determined. "And this time I am pressing charges. Thornton has gone too far." Next morning, Dalton rode to town with Tom and Charlie, all of them prepared to give statements to the sheriff. Eleanor stayed at the ranch with Jim, uneasy about being left behind but understanding that Dalton did not want her riding in her condition. She spent the day cleaning up what could be salvaged from the fire, trying to keep busy to avoid thinking about what was happening in town. Dalton returned at supper time, his expression grim. "The sheriff arrested Thornton. Enough people saw him and his men riding away from our place yesterday that he cannot deny it. He is being held on charges of arson. There will be a trial." "What if he makes bail?" Eleanor asked. "His bail was set at $10,000. Even for him, that is a lot of cash to come up with quickly." Dalton pulled her close. "We are going to be all right, Eleanor. This ends now." The trial took place in early September. Eleanor was 8 months pregnant, her belly enormous, but she insisted on attending. She sat in the courtroom and gave her testimony about the auction, about Thornton's threats, about watching him and his men ride away from their burning barn. Other ranchers testified too, men who had suffered similar harassment from Thornton over the years. The evidence was overwhelming. The jury took less than an hour to convict Marcus Thornton of arson. The judge sentenced him to 10 years in prison. As the sentence was read, Thornton turned to glare at Eleanor and Dalton, but there was defeat in his eyes now, not just rage. It was finally over. They rode home slowly, mindful of Eleanor's condition. She felt lighter than she had in months, as if a weight had been lifted from her shoulders. Thornton was gone, locked away where he could not hurt them. They could finally move forward without fear hanging over them. 3 weeks later, on a crisp September night, Eleanor went into labor. It was hard and long, lasting through the night and into the next day. The midwife from a neighboring ranch stayed with her the whole time, coaching her through the pains, while Dalton paced anxiously outside. Finally, as the sun began to set, Eleanor gave one final push and her baby entered the world with a healthy cry. "It is a boy," the midwife announced, placing the squalling infant on Eleanor's chest. Eleanor looked down at her son through tears of joy and exhaustion. He had a shock of dark hair like his father and was already waving tiny fists in outrage at his new surroundings. When Dalton was finally allowed into the room, his face transformed with wonder as he looked at his son. "He is perfect," Dalton whispered, touching one tiny hand with a gentle finger. The baby gripped it immediately, and Dalton laughed. Strong, too. They named him David after Dalton's father. David York squirmed and fussed and kept them up all night, and Eleanor had never been happier. This was what she had never dared to dream of during those dark days before the auction. A husband who loved her, a son to raise, a home where she was valued and safe. The ranch prospered over the next few years. They rebuilt the barn, bigger and better than before. Dalton expanded his horse breeding operation, and Eleanor's sewing business grew into a steady source of income. David grew into a sturdy toddler, constantly underfoot, wanting to help with everything. He had his father's gray eyes and his mother's determination, a combination that kept them constantly busy. When David was 2, Eleanor discovered she was pregnant again. This time, she gave birth to a daughter in the spring of 1881. They named her Rose, and she was as different from her brother as could be. Quiet where David was loud, content where he was restless. Eleanor loved watching Dalton with their children, seeing the gentle patience he showed teaching David to ride, the tender care he took holding Rose. More years passed. The children grew. David at 5 was already helping with the horses, showing his father's gift for handling animals. Rose at 3 followed Eleanor everywhere, learning to sew simple stitches with careful concentration. They added on to the house, building more bedrooms and a proper workshop for Eleanor's sewing. Tom and Charlie remained with them, becoming like family, uncles to the children in all but name. One evening in the summer of 1884, Eleanor stood on the porch watching her family. David was in the corral with Dalton, learning to rope a fence post. Rose sat at her feet, playing with a cloth doll Eleanor had made. The sun was setting over the mountains, painting everything gold. She thought back to that terrible day 7 years ago, standing on the auction block in Watsonville, certain her life was over. She had been sold to pay her father's debts. But Dalton York had looked at her and seen a person, not property. He had given her back her freedom and in doing so had won her heart. Now she stood here, mistress of a prosperous ranch, mother to 2 beautiful children, wife to a man who loved her more with every passing year. "Mama," Rose tugged on her skirt, "look what I made." Eleanor bent down to examine her daughter's handiwork, a crooked line of stitches in bright red thread. "That is beautiful, sweetheart. You are getting so good at sewing." David came running over, face flushed with excitement. "Mama, did you see? I roped the post 3 times in a row. I did see. You are getting as good as your father." She ruffled his dark hair so like Dalton's. Dalton joined them on the porch, sliding an arm around Eleanor's waist and pulling her close. "What are you thinking about?" he asked softly. "Everything," Eleanor said. "How far we have come. How different life is now from what I thought it would be. Regrets." There was a teasing note in his voice, but also genuine curiosity. Eleanor turned to look at him, this man who had saved her and then loved her and then built a life with her. "Not a single one. You gave me my life back, Dalton. You told me I owed only myself, and I chose to give myself to you." He kissed her then, soft and sweet, while their children made exaggerated sounds of disgust that turned into giggles. When they parted, Dalton rested his forehead against hers. "Best $5,000 I ever spent," he murmured. Eleanor laughed. "I am worth at least 6,000. At least," he agreed and kissed her again. They stood together as the stars began to emerge overhead, their children playing around them, the ranch spread out below in the gathering dusk. Eleanor thought about the girl she had been, terrified and alone, and the woman she had become. She had been sold as chattel, treated as less than human. But she had survived. More than that, she had thrived. She had learned that freedom was not just the absence of chains. It was the presence of choice, the ability to decide one's own path. She had chosen to stay at this ranch, chosen to fall in love with Dalton York, chosen to build this life. Every day, she woke up and chose it all over again. That was true freedom, and she owed it all to a cowboy who had looked at a woman on an auction block and decided that some things were worth more than money, worth more than anything. Things like dignity and compassion and the simple radical act of treating another human being with respect. "What are you smiling about?" Dalton asked. "Us," Eleanor said simply. "I am smiling about us." The years continued to unfold, each one bringing new challenges and joys. David grew into a skilled horseman, taking over more of the ranch work as Dalton's back began to complain about long days in the saddle. Rose discovered a talent for breeding and training the gentler horses, building a reputation for producing the finest ladies' mounts in California. They married eventually, David to a rancher's daughter from Montana, Rose to a banker's son from San Francisco. They gave Eleanor and Dalton grandchildren, filling the ranch house with noise and laughter once more. Eleanor continued her sewing well into her later years, her eyes remaining sharp even as her hair turned silver. She made wedding dresses for her granddaughters, shirts for her grandsons, quilts for every new baby born into their growing family. Dalton remained by her side through it all, his love never wavering, his devotion absolute. They celebrated their 50th wedding anniversary in 1929, surrounded by children and grandchildren and even a few great-grandchildren. The ranch had prospered beyond anything they could have imagined, but it was the family they had built that mattered most. That night, after everyone had gone to bed, Eleanor and Dalton sat on the porch as they had so many times before. "You remember the day we met?" Eleanor asked, her hand in his. "Every detail," Dalton replied. "You were the bravest woman I had ever seen, standing on that auction block with your head held high. I was terrified, terrified and brave. They are not mutually exclusive." He squeezed her hand gently. "I knew right then that you were special. I just did not know how much you would come to mean to me. You saved my life that day." "No," Dalton said firmly. "I just gave you a chance. You saved yourself, Eleanor. You took that chance and turned it into this." He gestured to the ranch, the house, the land they had built together. "All of this is because of your strength, your courage, your choice to trust me." Eleanor leaned her head on his shoulder, comfortable in the silence between them. They had been married for half a century, but it still felt like not enough time. She wanted more years with this man, more mornings waking up beside him, more evenings watching the sunset from their porch. "I love you," she said quietly. "I have loved you since you burned those papers and told me I owed only myself." "I love you too," Dalton replied. "I have loved you since you agreed to work for me instead of running away to the city, since you gave me a chance to prove myself." They sat together as the stars wheeled overhead, two people who had found each other against all odds and built something lasting. The ranch would go on after they were gone, passing to their children and grandchildren, a legacy of hard work and love. But more important than the land or the buildings or the money was the lesson they had learned and lived, that every person deserves freedom, dignity, and the chance to choose their own path. Eleanor Adelaide had been sold to pay her father's debts. Dalton York had told her she owed only herself. And from that single act of kindness and that simple truth, they had built a life beyond measure. A life filled with love and family and the satisfaction of work well done. A life that proved, over and over again, that one person's choice to do the right thing could change everything. As they finally rose to go inside, Eleanor took one last look at the valley spread out below them, the ranch they had built together glowing soft in the moonlight. This was home. This was family. This was the future she had never dared to dream of on that terrible day in Watsonville. And it was more than worth the journey it had taken to get here.